Hello everyone, this is Mr. Cole. This screencast is going to take a look at ancient Greece, and that's one of two civilizations here in the Mediterranean area that we'll be looking at. The first will be Greece, and next we'll be looking at Rome. Here's a map of ancient Greece, and there's two things I want you to notice about the geography, which is in the interaction with environment category for our spice. The first is the water or the seas that surround Greece, right around here in this area. And you can notice that there's a lot of islands, a lot of small peninsulas jutting out into the water. And that actually was a good thing in that it meant that they could easily access the sea to travel around by boat, and also for fishing. So there's good access to the coastline there. The other thing you can kind of see described on the map is that there was a lot of mountains and hills surrounding this area of Greece, and that meant that it was not easy to travel around. And so because of that, ancient Greece was not unified into one large country controlled by one large government. Instead, there were a bunch of small city-states, which are also called a polis. And a polis is a city-state, which means it's a city that is its own government in almost its own country, makes its own rules, its own laws. And there's two important city-states that we want to talk about, and they're called Sparta and Athens. And so what I just explained is describing the interaction with the environment and also how that is going to impact the political system. And as I mentioned, their governments were broken up into these small city-states, which is an urban center or a city center that controls the surrounding areas. And there were a lot of different kinds of governments for these. Some had monarchies, like kings and queens. Others had what's called a tyrant, which just had one person in control and having all the power. And then also there were even democracies where people got to vote. So let's take a closer look at these two city-states, Sparta and Athens. So first of all, Sparta was an aristocracy, which means that the upper class ruled. The upper class had most of the power, and they really had a strong military state, and that was a big focus for them. They really depended on the work or labor of slaves, and their economic life relied on agriculture. In Athens, which is the best known of the city-states, and a lot of times when people are talking about ancient Greece, they're really talking about Athens. It started as an aristocracy, just like Sparta, but later it became a democracy where people got to vote, and people had self-rule. This didn't mean that actually all people got to vote. It was only male citizens, so slaves could not vote. In Athens, there was great achievements in science and art and philosophy. Education and artistic expression were very important. And a few other important cultural characteristics. Architecture was very important, and you can see in this picture here in the upper left the Parthenon, which is a very famous piece of Greek architecture. Like many of the civilizations we've studied, Greeks were polytheistic, meaning they believed in many gods. The main gods were Zeus and his wife Hera. Poseidon was the god of the sea. Athena was the goddess of wisdom and war, and Apollo was god of the sun. And another aspect that was very important in ancient Greece were the Olympic Games. Today's Olympics, like the ones that just finished up in London a couple of weeks ago, started in ancient Greece, and the first Olympic Games were held in 776 BCE. And these original Olympic Games brought together athletes from across the Greek peninsula to honor the gods. And another one of the most famous aspects of Greek culture were these epic stories written by Homer called the Iliad and the Odyssey. As I mentioned, Greek philosophers and Greek philosophy was incredibly important, and the three of the most famous philosophers from ancient Greece were Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates, the first one, was the first philosopher to focus on ethical questions and trying to seek truth about human nature, what humans were, and he really believed in humans' ability to use reason to find answers to these questions. We know about Socrates thanks to Plato, who was his student, and Plato teaches us about Socrates through his writings. And the philosopher Aristotle wrote on a variety of subjects in politics, arts, and sciences, and he became a model of Greek thought by constructing arguments through the use of logic. One other aspect about Sparta and Athens I wanted to talk about in terms of social aspects of their cultures was how women and men, different roles that men and women had in each of these. In Sparta, women had a lot more equality with men. In fact, since Sparta really focused on the military, men would often be off fighting in wars, and women would therefore be back at home having a lot more power in government and politics. In Athens, men's and women's roles were a lot more traditional and unequal. And in Athens, men, like I said, had the right to vote, but women did not have any political rights or any role in the government. Another important cultural aspect is Greek language and the alphabet. The Greek language and alphabet built upon the Phoenician alphabet, which came from the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea. The Phoenicians were best known for their use of a phonetic alphabet, a system of 22 written marks or letters that each corresponded to a sound in the spoken language. Their alphabet was much simpler than any other written language of its day, but it was much easier to learn and to use for trading. The Greeks then built upon the Phoenician alphabet. They added signs for vowels, which the original system did not have. This Greek alphabet, became the basis for the development of many modern languages. And this is a very important step which eventually led to languages that are spoken in the world today. In terms of economics, there in the area, because of the geography we spoke about, there were limited crops that could be grown because of the terrain, the mountains and the hills, and poor soil. Animals that were domesticated for food and other uses included sheep, goats, cattle, and horses. And trade was very important so that people in Greece could get things that they couldn't grow or make for themselves. Things like timber, gold, iron, copper, tin, or grain. There were not many metal deposits in Greece, and so they had to go and trade for those metals. Another important invention that came along were coins, which helped with trade. So from about 500 to 449 BCE, Athens and Sparta, those two city-states we talked about, they joined together to defeat a series of invasions from Persia, which is over here. So this is Persia right here, and then up here on the upper left is where Greece is located. After those wars with Persia, Athens grew from a polis, or just a city-state, into an empire, which means they took control of a lot more land. Its dominant status made other city-states distrust them, and that included Sparta. From 431 to 404 BCE, Athens and Sparta and their allies fought each other for dominance in what was called the Peloponnesian Wars. When Athens suffered a devastating plague during the course of the war, the once proud and flourishing polis questioned why its gods had allowed such a great tragedy. The weakened Athens saw defeat at the hands of Sparta. During the 8th century BCE, populations of the Greek city-states increased tremendously, leading the Greeks to seek additional territory. They had more people, and so they wanted to get more land. And so the Greeks established a number of colonies in Sicily, which is on the very far left side of this map, which is where Italy is today. Also, they expanded into the eastern Mediterranean Sea in this area of the map, and also into the Black Sea up here just north of that. These new settlements allowed the Greeks the opportunity to trade grapes and olive oil for products that their rugged terrain, their land, could not produce because of the mountains that they lived on. Colonies not only served as outlets for population, they also sent Greek culture throughout the Mediterranean world through cultural diffusion. So when Athens and Sparta were weakened because of fighting against each other in the Peloponnesian War, this caught the attention of Philip, who was a ruler of the kingdom of Macedonia to the north of Greece, right here on this map. When Philip's plans to conquer the Greek city-states were cut short by his death, his son Alexander stepped in to carry out his father's ambitions. By the time of his death in 323 BCE, at the age of 33, Alexander, who we call Alexander the Great, had conquered not only the Greek city-states, but also Egypt, Syria, Palestine, and Persia. So all of this in yellow here was controlled by Alexander the Great. And as we mentioned, this helped to spread Greek culture to the east throughout all this area in the orange color on this map. Throughout the territories he controlled, Alexander established cities, many named Alexandria, in his honor. In order to blend the cultures of Persia and Greece, he married a Persian woman and encouraged his officers to do the same. Upon his death, however, Alexander's empire was divided among his generals. In spite of these divisions, a relative balance of power was maintained among the remains of Alexander's former empire, as the Greek culture served as a unifying force in these areas. The rule of Alexander the Great has been called the Hellenistic Age, which is named after the influence of the Hellenes, which is what the Greeks called themselves. And there were very important achievements during this time, including Euclidean geometry, the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. There were studies of the human anatomy, and even a calculation of the circumference of the earth by Eratosthenes. And so just as a quick review, during Alexander the Great's empire, Greek culture was spread towards the east, the Middle East, Persia, and into Asia. New cities were created, long-distance trade and communication took place, and there were many achievements such as geometry, human anatomy, and mathematics. And upon his death, the empire was broken apart, but the Greek culture was an important part, played an important part in unifying the region. And so this has been our screencast on ancient Greece. Please speak to your teacher if you have any additional questions.